Syria, after the fall, how a state was unmade and a warlord became president. When the Syrian president palace when the Syrian presidential palace raised a new flag in early January 2025, the moment was framed internationally as an ending. News tickets News tickers spoke of closure, diplomats of transition, investors of reconstruction. 14 years of war, it was said, had finally reached their terminus. But the story of Syria didn't end in December 2024. It simply crossed a it simply crossed a threshold. What collapsed was not merely the Assad regime, nor even the Ba'ath state that had ruled Damascus for decades. What collapsed was the very idea of Syria as a sovereign, unitary political entity capable of resisting external design. The man who walked into power, Ahmed al-Shara, better known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, didn't arrive as a revolutionary aberration. He arrived as the logical conclusion of a system that had been under deliberate strain for more than a decade. In order to understand why Syria looks the way it does today, we must abandon the comforting fiction of chaos and accident. Syria was not lost to fate, it was engineered into weakness. The long erosion, when war became a process, not an event. The Syrian conflict is often narrowed as a civil war that spiraled out of control. That framing is convenient and false. From its earliest stages in 2021, Syria became the arena for multi-layered intervention strategy, whose objective was not reform, not even immediate regime collapse, but the structural degradation. Every pillar that sustained statehood was placed under pressure: military cohesion, economic viability, territorial integrity, and social trust. The armed insurgency was only the one visible layer; beneath it operated a quieter, more enduring campaign. Sanctions were imposed not to change behavior but to destroy fiscal capacity. Energy infrastructure was targeted or seized. Trade routes were severed. Currency access was throttled. Skilled labor fled. Demographic balance shifted as entire colonies and communities were displaced. By the mid-2010s, Syria had already entered a state of managed disintegration. The war no longer needed to be won, it needed only to continue long enough. The myth of a moderate center. Western policy rested on a central fiction that a viable, secular, moderate opposition could emerge organically if given time and arms. In practice, the center never existed. Groups with ideology, discipline, and external backing thrived. Groups without them collapsed. Over time, weapons flow not according to intent but according to battlefield gravity. The most effective actors absorbed resources, manpower, and territory. By 2016, Salafi jihadist formations were no longer peripheral, they were central. Among them, Jabhat al-Nusra distinguished itself not merely through violence but through organization. Under Julani's command, the group learned administration, taxation, intelligence penetration, narrative control, while diplomats debated legitimacy. Nasra built institutions. This was not accidental, it was survival selection. Russia, Iran, the temporary stay of execution. Syria didn't fall in 2015 because external actors intervened decisively. Russian military entry stabilized the front lines. Iranian logistics and Hezbollah ground forces compensated for Syrian army attrition. Together, they transformed a collapsing state into a fortified one, weakened but intact. For nearly a decade, Syria existed in suspended animation. Its sovereignty was compromised, but its central authority survived. They interlude fostered This interlude fostered a dangerous illusion that Syria had weathered the storm. It had not. It had merely postponed the final phase. 2024, the moment the pillars gave way. By late 2024, strategic environment had changed. Russia's focus lay elsewhere. Iran faced pressure across multiple theaters. Hezbollah had suffered attrition. Israel intensified its strikes. Economic sanctions had hollowed out the Syrian state beyond repair. When the final offensive came, it encountered not resistance but absence. Units dissolved. Command chains vanished. Assad fled not because he was defeated tactically, but because the state had ceased to be functioning. What followed was not a power vacuum, it was a transfer. Julani's metamorphosis from emir to executive. Ahmed al-Shara didn't suggest himself as Syria's new leader. He was selected by circumstances. Years before Assad's fall, Julani had become a careful transformation. Al-Qaeda's insignia disappeared. Rhetoric softened. Interviews were staged. Administrative competency was emphasized. Western analysts began to speak of localism, pragmatism, and evolution. This was not ideological conversion, it was strategic adaptation. By the time Damascus fell, Giuliani's organization already governed territory, collected taxes, ran courts, and enforced order. In a landscape defined by exhaustion, he offered predictability. That was enough. Recognition without reckoning. The speed with which Giuliani was normalized and revealed an uncomfortable truth. Principles were never the constraint, utility was. Within months, diplomatic language shifted, sanctions were suspended, terrorist designations were quietly reviewed. Western capitalists adopted a posture of cautious engagement. The logic was simple: sustainability, stability, however obtained, was preferable to a continued fragmentation. That Giuliani's past included documented atrocities became secondary. He controlled territory, he opposed Iran, he promised order. History shows that such bargains are rarely temporary. Fragmentation is outcome, not failure. Syria today is nominally unified but functionally partitioned. Could these regions operate autonomously under foreign protection? South communities arm themselves independently, coastal areas speak openly of separation, foreign militias maintain for permanent footprints. This is not transitional instability. This is structural fragmentation. A fragmented Syria cannot project power. It cannot coordinate resistance. It cannot coordinate resistance. It cannot pursue independent development. It becomes a terrain rather than an actor. For neighboring power, this configuration is optimal. Reconstruction and the economy of dependency. Post-war Syria is already rebuilt, built on Syrian terms. Investment arrives bundled with condition. Contracts flow outwards. Strategic sectors remain externally managed. Reconstruction becomes a mechanism of control rather than recovery. This is not new, as it mirrors patterns seen elsewhere. War destroys sovereignty. Reconstruction monetizes its absence. Giuliani's government administers this process. It doesn't direct it. The end of the Syrian idea. The most profound loss isn't territory or economic, it is psychological. For decades, Syrians identified first as Syrians. Sect, tribe, region were subordinate identities. That hierarchy has inverted. When identity fragments, states do not heal easily. Even if borders remains, cohesion does not. A conclusion that writes itself. Syrian transformation was neither tragic inevitability nor revolutionary triumph. It was the predictable outcome of a sustained external pressure, internal erosion, and strategic compromise. Assad's Syria was brutal, centralized, and defiant. Giuliani's Syria is compliant, fractured, and internationally acceptable. The choice made by global powers is clear, the lesson is darker. In modern international systems, sovereignty isn't lost in moments of collapse, but in years of managed decay, until the final handover feels natural. Syria didn't fall, it was replaced.